I rise today to address the ongoing collapse of one of the world's most beautiful cities. San Francisco has been deteriorating for years, but it is now in a state of total freefall. In just the last few weeks, Nordstrom announced it is closing its San Francisco stores, with Westfield Mall blaming, quote, lack of enforcement against rampant criminal activity. Whole Foods is closing its flagship mid-market location, citing the safety of employees after 568 emergency calls in 13 months. T-Mobile just announced it is permanently shuttering its flagship location, and Anthropologie and Saks also announced closures this month. My district starts about 100 miles inland from San Francisco. I have many memories visiting San Francisco as a child, and tens of thousands of my constituents used to visit every year, visiting the Wharf or Ghirardelli Square, riding the trolley cars, going to a Giants game, or countless other forms of art, entertainment, and culture. But by and large, that's not the case anymore. People have learned to stay away. And that's because, as the San Francisco Chronicle put it, the city is on the verge of collapse. But let's zoom out for a moment and look at the state of California as a whole. The census recently reported new population estimates for 2022. We lost residents again, dipping below 30 million people. Over the last 3 years, California has lost a net 871,000 people to other states. That is unusual in our history. In fact, prior to 2020, it was unprecedented. For every year on record, going back to 1900, our state's population grew. Over decades, the Golden State forged an identity of historic significance and was at the leading edge of social, political, and technological progress. Ronald Reagan, in his inaugural address as governor, said California should never take second place. We were the state where anyone could get ahead. Now, sadly, we've become the state many can't wait to leave behind. We do lead the nation, but in all of the wrong ways. Poverty, inequality, taxes, regulation, income stagnation, and yes, departures. The decline of California matters not just for people in our state. It is a grave national concern. Beyond being the most populous state in the Union, the identity of California is central to the identity of America. A loss for one is by definition a loss for the other. And California's problems are becoming America's problems in a larger sense as well. California's governor, Gavin Newsom, has touted California as a, quote, model for the nation. And President Biden is taking him at his word. From crime to immigration to education to economic and workforce policies, this administration's governing motto might as well be, as California goes, so goes the nation. And if California offers a preview of where our country is headed if we don't change course, San Francisco offers an even starker warning. Indeed, before he was governor of California, Newsom was mayor of San Francisco. Fittingly, it was during his Red State tour last month, where he left his post as governor to lecture other states on how to govern themselves, that Newsom's own home city reached the point of total collapse. Upon his return, Newsom had no choice but to recognize how dire the situation had become, taking the extraordinary step of sending the National Guard into San Francisco. His model for the nation is one that requires military intervention just to maintain order. San Francisco is the part of our state where failed policies, radical politics, and public corruption are in their most advanced stage, and where residents are most rapidly fleeing. In an article headlined, "San Francisco Falls into the Abyss," UCLA economics professor Leo Haney writes, "No major city has failed at the same level as Detroit, whose population dropped from 1.85 million people in 1950 to about 630,000 today. Move over Detroit, here comes San Francisco," he writes, which lost 6.3% of its population between 2019 and 2021, a rate of decline larger than any two-year period in Detroit's history and unprecedented among any major U.S. city. The reasons for this are not a mystery. They're readily apparent just by visiting and walking around the city. Foremost among them are crime, drug addiction, homelessness, waste, unaffordability, and failing schools, all as a result of failed governance. Starting with crime, California has essentially legalized many forms of it, making theft of merchandise below $950 a misdemeanor, as well as the possession of even Class A drugs. In practice, this means offenders are rarely, if ever, prosecuted, and businesses have stopped even reporting losses. San Francisco's anti-law enforcement policies have dramatically compounded these problems. Under former District Attorney George Gascon, crime rose significantly across the board, including aggravated assault, sexual assault, carjackings, retail theft, and much more. Gascon's successor, another so-called progressive prosecutor elected through substantial outside funding, was so reckless in not prosecuting crime that dozens of his own prosecutors quit, and the voters of San Francisco overwhelmingly recalled him from office. To make matters worse, in 2020, San Francisco defunded the police, shifting $120 million away from law enforcement. Last year, the Castro Merchants Association, representing 125 business owners, wrote a scathing letter regarding the city's failure to address the lawlessness around them. One member said, "We're just seeing constant vandalism, constant drug use in public, people passed out on the sidewalk, people having psychotic breakdowns, and it's not something a small business owner should have to deal with." One facet of the crime problem, drug use, is now ubiquitous to the sights and sounds of the city. Walking through San Francisco, you'll see open drug use and drug dealing with an open-air drug market that even Gavin Newsom is now sending in the National Guard to disrupt. While California has among the highest illegal rates of illegal drug use in the country, San Francisco is well above the state average. And tragically, the number of overdose deaths has skyrocketed in recent years, from 222 in 2017 to 647 last year. This only got worse during the COVID shutdowns, as far more people in the city died from overdoses than from COVID. Facing among the most punishing lockdowns in the country, emergency room mental health visits increased substantially, especially for young people. It certainly doesn't help matters that the supply of drugs is so abundant thanks to the crisis at our border, and San Francisco declared itself a sanctuary city even before California became a sanctuary state. Very much connected to the crises of crime, drug use, and mental health is the explosion of homelessness in San Francisco. Once again, while California leads the nation in homelessness, San Francisco is worst of all. Between 2005 and 2020, the number of homeless increased from 5,404 to 8,124. During that same period, homelessness declined significantly nationwide. Within a 3-year span, complaints of homeless encampments to the city's 311 line increased from 2 to 62 per day, and the share of the homeless population that is unsheltered has also gone up significantly in recent years. Another feature of the San Francisco landscape that contributes to, and is a sign of the continuing deterioration is the appearance of waste. Between 2014 and 2018, calls about human feces doubled to 20,933. $100 million was spent on street cleaning in 2019 alone. In a 3-year span, the city replaced 300 lampposts corroded by urine. The overall condition of many areas is something no American should ever have to experience, especially kids while they're on their way walking to school. And speaking of schools, San Francisco Unified has the second widest achievement gap of any school district in California, with over 5,000 students. A CalMatters investigation from 2017 found that San Francisco had the highest black student achievement gap of any county in California. Just 19% of black students in San Francisco passed the state's reading test, compared to 31% statewide. And this was before COVID. While California was last in the nation getting students back to school, San Francisco was again worst of all, keeping schools closed not only in 2020, but through the end of the 2020-2021 school year. While they refused to actually operate schools, the district instead spent time on a commission to rename them, even proposing taking Abraham Lincoln's name off of an elementary school. The district then came up with a scheme to scam the state by pretending to open for the last 2 weeks of the school year in order to get millions of dollars in extra funding. Predictably, after these school closures, test scores have since plummeted even further. The citizens of San Francisco responded by recalling 3 of the school board members from office, each by over 70% of the vote. As if these basic quality of life issues weren't enough, the city has also become completely unaffordable. A survey from the Economist Intelligence Unit found that San Francisco is one of the 10 most expensive cities to live in the entire world. Average rent for a one-bedroom apartment is over $3,500. According to data from the California Association of Realtors, a San Franciscan needs to make nearly $400,000 to buy a median income home. The cost of utilities, groceries, and other goods is also well above the national average. At the root of all of these problems is uniquely bad governance. The San Francisco Chronicle put it this way: San Francisco's bureaucracy isn't just incompetent and comically inefficient. It is a corrupting force in our city life. Spiritually, yes, they wrote, but also literally. They called it a corruption born of needlessly complicated government bureaucracy. To take a few examples, it costs an estimated $100,000 to build one tiny home for the homeless in San Francisco. That's 10 times more than even other places in the Bay Area. It costs almost $1.2 million to build a single unit of affordable housing. It can take 87 permits, 1,000 days of meeting, and $500,000 in fees to build residential housing projects. Recently, San Francisco politicians boasted they had, quote, brought home the bacon by securing $1.7 million in taxpayer dollars for a single toilet. The public transportation system is a model of mismanagement, with Bay Area Rapid Transit facing a $1.1 billion deficit over 5 years, with trains that are dangerous to ride and that rarely ever show up on time. No wonder ridership has plummeted. The city itself, by the way, is projecting a $728 million deficit over just the next 2 fiscal years. I don't want to see California and San Francisco in particular continue to decline. And I certainly don't want its problems to continue to spread to the rest of the country. The federal government provides an abundance of federal funding to San Francisco, and it must start treating this jurisdiction for what it is, a failed city. With all of this federal funding going to San Francisco, those funds are often being used in ways that seem to do more harm than good. For future funding, it's important to give extra scrutiny and oversight to how these funds are being used, and the funding should be accompanied by conditions that will stimulate reform. I believe it is not too late to turn around this city or our state. For proof, you can look at the communities of my district. While California as a whole is declining in population, the vast majority of my district is growing. Placer County and Folsom, for instance, are growing as much as anywhere in California. Our communities are rated among the best in California to live, raise a family, and retire. While California as a state leads the nation in U-Haul departures, Roseville is the second-place city in the entire country in U-Haul arrivals. Many of the people leaving San Francisco are coming to my district for safer communities, a more manageable cost of living, better schools, and an overall better quality of life. During the COVID-19 era, we kept our businesses and schools open, got them open earlier than anywhere, avoiding much of the damage experienced across the state. And we also had among the state's best public health outcomes. We still face the headwinds of misguided policies enacted at the state level, but we strive to use tools of local governance and community partnerships to do what is best for our citizens. This is the model that our state should strive for, and it is the model that many other states are already following. It's the model for our country to reverse the policies that have gotten us so off track in recent years. In this way, the collapse of San Francisco is a wake-up call, a warning to the nation about the need for a course correction. I look forward to working with people of good faith on both sides of the aisle to save this beautiful city and to prevent the rest of our country from going down the same path.